In the summer of 1944, France was liberated. German troops retreated. Allied tanks rolled in. Church bells rang across cities that had been silent for 4 years. Crowds flooded the streets. Flags reappeared from hiding. Kisses were exchanged in public squares. And then, women were dragged into those same squares. Chairs were placed in the center. Scissors came out. By the end of the purge, roughly 20,000 women across France would have their heads shaved in public. Not by courts. Not by judges. By neighbors. If you like history that shows what happens the day after the parade ends, subscribe. Because liberation is clean in photographs. In real life, it rarely is. From 1940 to 1944, France lived under German occupation. Northern France was directly controlled by the Nazis. The South operated under the Vichy regime, a French government that collaborated with Germany. During those 4 years, food was rationed. Resistance networks formed. Informants operated quietly. Black markets flourished. Survival became complicated. Some French citizens resisted actively. Some collaborated openly. Most tried to navigate a dangerous system without attracting attention. It's easy to judge in hindsight. It's harder to make moral decisions when soldiers with rifles control your street. When Allied forces landed on D-Day and began pushing inland, German authority weakened quickly. And when authority disappears, something fills the vacuum. Often revenge. The French called it épuration sauvage, the wild purge. Before formal courts processed collaboration cases, communities handled matters themselves. Some collaborators were beaten. Some were executed. Many were imprisoned. But one punishment became highly visible and almost ritualistic. Head shaving. The women targeted were accused of collaboration horizontal. Horizontal collaboration. The term was both bureaucratic and brutally literal. It referred to women who had sexual relationships with German soldiers. Some of these relationships were transactional. Sex in exchange for food, protection, or safety. Some were romantic. Some were coercive. Some were survival. Some were enthusiastic. Some were false accusations fueled by rumor. In a country emerging from humiliation, nuance was not in high demand. The process was simple and public. A woman would be seized, sometimes dragged through the streets, sometimes summoned to a square. A chair would be placed in the center. The town gathered. Scissors, clippers, shears. Hair fell in clumps. Children watched. Neighbors watched. Men who had quietly endured occupation watched. Some shouted insults. Some spat. Some laughed. Photographers documented it. The images still exist. Women seated, stunned. Hair pooling at their feet. Crowds pressed in tightly behind them. The mood in some photographs looks disturbingly celebratory. Because public punishment does something specific. It creates unity. It says, we are cleansing ourselves. It transforms private resentment into public ritual. And it requires a visible target. Here's the uncomfortable part. Tens of thousands of French men had collaborated too. They worked in Vichy administration. They processed paperwork. They supplied goods to German forces. They managed businesses that profited from occupation. Some joined collaborationist militias. But prosecuting those cases required evidence. Documents. Trials. Political decisions. Shaving a woman's head required none of that. The accusation was visible. Her relationship was public. Punishment could happen immediately. No legal procedure necessary. In a nation that had been militarily defeated in 6 weeks in 1940, masculinity and national pride had taken a hit. Publicly humiliating women accused of intimacy with the enemy restored something symbolic. It was faster than rebuilding an army. It was easier than examining bureaucratic complicity. It felt decisive. And it looked decisive. Some of these women had children fathered by German soldiers. And those children were present. Infants in arms. Toddlers clinging to skirts. Babies too young to understand why a crowd had gathered. Imagine sitting in a wooden chair in the center of your town square, holding a child, while someone you've known your entire life cuts your hair off in front of everyone. The child doesn't know what collaboration is. The child doesn't know what occupation means. The child only knows that their mother is suddenly surrounded by noise. And that something is wrong. In several documented cases, women were shaved while holding babies fathered by German soldiers. The symbolism was intentional. The message was public. This wasn't just punishment. It was marking. These children would later be referred to as enfants de boches. Literally, children of Germans. It wasn't a neutral term. It was an accusation built into a nickname. Estimates suggest tens of thousands of children were born in France to German fathers during the occupation. Some fathers were soldiers passing through. Some were long-term relationships. Some were coercive. Some were romantic. The child had no role in that context. But communities have long memories. And children grow up inside those memories. After the war, some of these children were bullied. Some were ostracized. Some were reminded, repeatedly, that their existence was linked to occupation. In small towns especially, everyone knew. Hair grows back. A shaved head lasts months. A label can last decades. Some women eventually rebuilt their lives quietly. Some moved. Some stayed and endured. Some children would only learn later who their fathers were. Others knew early and carried that knowledge through schoolyards and neighborhoods that did not forget. When historians talk about post-war reckoning, they often focus on trials and executions. But social punishment operates differently. It doesn't require paperwork. It requires memory. And memory is very difficult to appeal. Liberation ended foreign control. It did not end local judgment. And for many of these women, and their children, the war did not end in 1944. It just changed shape. Historians estimate that approximately 20,000 women were publicly shaved in France between 1944 and 1945. That figure is an estimate. There was no national registry titled "Hair Removed in the Name of Justice." Many incidents were local, handled in town squares, outside cafes, in front of city halls, sometimes recorded, often not. Some were photographed. Some were mentioned in local newspapers. Some were never formally documented at all. Because these were not official state sentences. They were community actions, spontaneous in timing, predictable in pattern, and they happened everywhere. In Paris, women were shaved near the Hôtel de Ville within days of liberation. In Normandy, shortly after Allied troops moved through, similar scenes unfolded in market squares. In small villages, populations barely large enough to fill a church still found space for a chair and a pair of scissors. In provincial towns, crowds gathered as if attending a civic event. This was not confined to one political faction, not one region, not one class. Urban neighborhoods, rural communes, coastal cities, industrial centers. The geography varied. The ritual did not. A woman accused. A crowd assembled. Hair cut publicly. Often followed by a parade through the streets. The pattern repeated often enough that it became recognizable. If you lived in France in late 1944, you likely heard about it happening somewhere nearby. Or saw it yourself. It wasn't a coordinated national policy. There was no Ministry of Haircut Enforcement. It spread socially, visually, imitatively. One town shaved 5 women. The neighboring town shaved 3. The message traveled faster than any official decree. This is what we do now. That's what makes the number significant. 20,000 is not an accident. It's not a statistical anomaly. It's a cultural response. Not centralized, but widespread. Not ordered from Paris, but performed across France. This was not one dramatic incident remembered for shock value. It was repetition. And repetition tells you something about a society's mood. It tells you that the anger wasn't isolated. It was ambient. It tells you that the impulse to punish was shared. And that, in 1944, the quickest way to display loyalty to liberated France was to pick up scissors. One of the most striking elements is the photography. These weren't hidden punishments carried out in back alleys. They were staged in open squares. And in many cases, someone made sure a camera was present. The images are clear. Daylight, public spaces, women seated in chairs, hair falling in visible piles, men leaning in with scissors, sometimes smiling, crowds packed tightly behind them, faces curious, animated, engaged. In several photographs, the mood feels disturbingly close to festive. People dressed well. Children perched on shoulders for a better view. Onlookers craning forward the way they might at a parade. Because liberation had arrived. And liberation demanded symbols. Flags were one symbol. Shaved heads became another. The ritual had visual power. It transformed abstract collaboration into something you could see. You couldn't see a man who had signed supply contracts with the German army. You couldn't see a bureaucrat who had processed deportation paperwork. You couldn't see a business owner who had quietly profited from occupation. But you could see a woman in a chair. You could see hair being removed. You could see the result instantly. Public humiliation is efficient theater. It creates a scene. It generates photographs. It produces proof that something is being done. Scissors are simple. They require no legal framework. No investigation. No witness testimony. They produce immediate transformation. A tribunal takes months. A haircut takes minutes. And in 1944, France needed visible transformation. Needed evidence that the occupation had not just ended, but been morally reversed. So cameras clicked. Images circulated. Some were published in newspapers. Some kept as private souvenirs. Some later archived as documentation of a nation resetting itself in real time. The photographs matter, because they show something subtle. The crowd is rarely conflicted. It looks certain. Certain that this is justice. Certain that this is necessary. Certain that this is cleansing. Public rituals are powerful because they convert anger into unity. For a moment, everyone watching shares the same side. The same posture. The same judgment. It's easier to punish intimacy than bureaucracy. Easier to punish a woman in a chair than a company that supplied steel to the Wehrmacht. One involves paperwork, influence, and political consequence. The other involves scissors. And scissors are decisive. They leave no appeal. They leave no ambiguity. And most importantly, they leave a mark you can see from across the square. To be clear, France did conduct formal purges. Thousands of collaborators were tried. Some were executed legally. Some imprisoned. Some barred from public office. But the head shavings largely occurred outside formal legal structures. They were social punishment. Immediate. Emotional. Highly visible. They served a purpose. They signaled that France was no longer passive. That the occupation was over. That humiliation had been redirected. Whether they delivered justice is another question. Most of the women survived. Hair grew back. Life resumed. But communities remember. Many remained in the same towns. The same markets. The same streets. Now marked. Some moved away. Some married. Some lived quietly. Some carried the stigma for decades. Meanwhile, many male collaborators reintegrated into business and administration after legal proceedings concluded. Paper trails fade. Shaved heads do not, at least not immediately. This episode tells us something uncomfortable about post-war societies. When oppression ends, anger does not evaporate. It looks for shape, for form, for targets. Justice and revenge often arrive together. They overlap. They blur. And they don't distribute evenly. The shaving of 20,000 women did not rebuild France. It did not erase occupation. It did not undo collaboration. But it provided something immediate. A visible reset. A ritual of purification. A way to say, we are not them. Even if the moral ledger was far more complicated. In photos of liberated France, you'll see joy. Kisses in the streets. Allied soldiers lifted into the air. But if you widen the frame, you'll also see chairs in town squares. Hair falling. Crowds gathered. Around 20,000 women lost their hair during France's reckoning. Some were guilty. Some were opportunistic. Some were surviving. Some were simply in the wrong place when the crowd formed. Liberation ended foreign control. It did not end human impulse. History is rarely divided into heroes and villains. Sometimes it's divided into people with scissors. And people in chairs. If you want history that doesn't skip the uncomfortable parts, subscribe. Because what happens after victory is often more revealing than the battle itself.